Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to season 5, but it's actually our first episode of Kid Lit International because we have changed the name to represent who we are more so than being the Inspire series. So we are still inspiring. We still have lots of information to share, still an open conversation. So welcome, Sarah, Holly, Michelle, and Chris from UK, Canada, Turkey, and Australia. Karen is still off on holidays. She will be back for week 3. Josh, unfortunately, is unable to make it for the whole series. But we are sending him big hugs, and he assures me he will be back for the next series with lots of wonderful ideas. So hello, Josh, and big hugs. And Chris, you are joining us as a guest tonight from Turkey. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yep, still here, sweltering and melting in the heat. Summer has definitely arrived. So if there is a little bit of noise, it's the air conditioner, and there's no way I'm turning it off. Yeah. So I've been here now, I've worked out this week, I've been here 8 years, which astonishes me because I think it's the longest time I've been in a single country since my childhood. So spending most of my time actually jumping in as a bit of a freelance journalist for the local paper at the moment, still looking after all the stray dogs. Thankfully, they're all okay. And continuing with the books and actually relaunching the first book next week because I've managed to end the contract with the publisher, which I probably shouldn't smile quite so much about. But it means I have control back again, which, particularly with what we're about to talk about, is really, really important.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So let's dive right into tonight's topic, and it's one that's been a little bit controversial, or maybe not a little bit, a lot controversial, greatly controversial over the years, gone from little to greatly, and that is talking about the translation of books from one language to another. Chris, you've just had a book translated. Can we start with you? What's your experience?
We're in the process of it. It actually started, we have a family friend who's actually my au pair. I remember her changing my brother's nappies. I've known her that long. And she comes from Barcelona originally. She moved to Dallas many years ago, where she was teaching Spanish-speaking kids English and helping them through that. When my book came out, she actually bought plenty of copies, which I'm grateful for, and gave them all to the kids. They used them for book reports and plenty of other things, even did a video call with them. And she suddenly went, I used to work for a publisher translating books into Spanish. And I went, what? It's something I'd never even thought about. And from that came, well, hang on, it's a kid's book. These kids are using it to learn their English. There's a huge Spanish-speaking market over in the US, and obviously Spain as well. And she said, I'll translate it for you. And with her experience and the fact she retired 10 days ago as a teacher, we're now full steam ahead on it. And it's been really interesting going, how are you going to take things that might only make sense in English and turn them into Spanish? And to keep that meaning flowing. And I think because she's done over 20 books for a major publisher, she's really got her eye on how to do that. But obviously this takes time. It's not something you publish a book and go, oh, we'll do it in a different language using whatever translation system. That just won't work. It really is a skill. And from what I'm seeing, people don't get paid very much for it either, which is a little bit hideous for them. But then again, we're authors. We know we don't get minimum wage. So there's not a lot we can do about it either. So for me, this whole journey of going from never even having contemplated translating it into a different language to then going, hang on, there's a big market, because it's about stray dogs, the market will buy into it. And I think for me, the whole translation part was I could have it translated into Arabic or whatever, but it wouldn't sell if I did that. Having it translated into Spanish is something where there is actually an active market for it. So for me, it was, firstly, it's very cool having the book in a different language. I also checked on Amazon and saw they have a specific category for books in Spanish, and went, hang on, this could work really quite nicely. And so doing that research, the bit that terrifies me, but thankfully her son is a marketing specialist and graphic designer, was doing a lot of the social media marketing and getting the Spanish right in what I put on it. Thankfully, I also have help with that, because otherwise I'd be in panic mode and probably come up saying the wrong thing in a different language and being destroyed for it. So I think with translation, it's identifying, is there a market for your book to be in that language? And then making sure you've got help, because as we all know, one wrong word on social media and that can be that. So it's having that help, accepting the fact it is going to take a long time to do, which isn't a problem. A book lives forever, so it will take as long as it takes. And I suppose in some ways it's like working with an illustrator or a designer. You've got to let the specialists do their job. Trying to jump in and say, well, we should do this, we should do that, won't work. The acknowledgements are going to be fun, because I think she actually tried to translate the original UK acknowledgements direct. And it's going, no, we're going to rewrite that bit, because obviously I have to say thank you to her. So there's a lot of thought process that goes in. It's not just about translating a book. It is like relaunching a book for the first time. And I think that's been the biggest surprise to me. You go, oh, we'll put it in Spanish. There's a lot more to it than that.
A lot more complex. You said that you saw that Amazon had a specific area for Spanish. Was that the only language? I'm just curious.
No, it wasn't. When I was checking the categories for relaunching the book anyway, Spanish, French, German, and Portuguese, all came up. There are guaranteed to be other. I know Japanese is up there somewhere,
okay.
But I was quite surprised. And with it being Amazon.com or .co.uk or Australia, it's actually having on those English-speaking Amazon portals a particular Spanish or different language is incredibly helpful, because it's what's needed. It's great putting a book up there in Spanish, but if you don't have those categories, no one's ever going to find them. So the more I use Amazon, the more impressed I am, to be honest. It really is a bit of a surprise, and you can see why it dominates the market, really.
Yeah. Sarah, can you tell us about your experience with translation?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because to kind of simplify the whole translation within literature topic, it's something that I think so many authors would like to happen. You know, when you speak to authors, you know, what's one big thing that you'd love to happen with your book? I'd love to see it in a different language. But it's one topic that actually publishers are very, very wary of. So we've got these two halves, as always: author wants and publishers reality, and what they tend to shy away from. What I've learned over the last few years, I mean, the Heavy Bag's been translated into 16 languages, not published in every single one of those languages, but translated for different kind of UNICEF events and for certain charities. But what I've realized are these sticking points. If you would like your book to be translated, first of all, you obviously have to own the rights of that. So that's what Chris was talking about. He's taken back the rights of his book. So it has to be yours. So if you have had your book published with a publisher, because I actually had quite a few Kidlit authors message me and say, oh, it's sitting with such and such, but I'd really like to sit in this language. That's kind of out of your control. So we're really talking about self-published books, unless you've got a really good relationship with, say, an indie publisher that you can kind of talk to them about this. So first of all, you have to own the rights. I started out when I was first translating the book, and I had lots of people say, oh, well, I speak this language, so I could translate it into this, this, and this. So that's a big no-no for publishers. Again, as Chris was saying, the translator to translate books, and specifically children's books and picture books, they really have to have that editorial knowledge, that sort of publishing experience, as well as being a translator, because somebody who knows that language can just translate it and they will translate the text, but it won't work for that publishing house, because there's lots of other different decisions that come into how that text needs to sit for them, their ethos as a publishing house, their word count, the illustrations, you know, there's a lot going on. So it's very lovely when people say, oh, well, I speak this language and I can translate it for you, but I would tend to shy away from that unless they've had any kind of experience with translating books, you know, whatever your genre is. One of the reasons that the publishers tend to shy away a little bit from translating is because we don't just translate. As Chris was saying, you know, you're effectively relaunching this book, and when it relaunches in another language, you've got all these tricky legal elements that the publishing house has to consider, of territories and where else that language might be used. So there's a lot of kind of legal stuff behind it, which is why most publishing houses, if they deal with translation, it's a separate department. You know, there's multiple people working there. They're there for the rights, the territories, the languages. It is a whole nother minefield. So that's what it looks like when you just kind of look in and when you're in there. But it's not a closed door. It's definitely something that, from speaking to publishers over the years, it's something that they are definitely interested in. They're just kind of wary how it would work if they haven't done that before. So with translation, you really have to get the essence of what that book is, and it has to be able to sit within each culture, each context, you know, where it sits. So there's a lot that goes on behind it. But it is a big thing now. I mean, at all of the book fairs this year, there's been specific keynote speakers, areas about translation. So it's definitely something that's just built this momentum, and it is there and it is happening. So it's something that I think is going to be more attainable for authors, but there is quite a bit of legwork that you need to do. So you do need to do your research. You need to look into how this foreign rights market works. But it is achievable, and there are other ways around there. So, for example, like I've just said, you know, you could take your book, your self-published book, to a charity or an organisation in another country within a different language, and it may be something that they would be happy to platform for you, which again makes that attractive for publishers. So there's definitely movement. It's something that a lot of people want to have, and it is lovely. It is lovely. There's, you know, there's no getting away from it, that every time a new language comes in your thoughts, these are your thoughts, this is your story, but someone else has created it. It is lovely, and I do think authors actually should have a go at sort of going for that and sort of understanding what it's like. And because you will be the self-published author of that book, you will learn a lot about this process and the business as you go, and with each translation it's going to become easier. So I definitely think it's something that people should be working towards. I just think you need to really do your research about everything around it, and don't just think, I know somebody who speaks that language, they can translate it and then I'll see what happens. But I definitely think it is definitely the way forward. There's a lot of Indigenous languages, which is a big push at the moment, with White Ravens publishing books, who, you know, and other organisations for translated literature who really want it out there. We're talking about Amazon that have, you know, a specific language area for books, but there's so many other places which actually hold all the different books all the different languages, specifically for children's books, because obviously, you know, children are mobile and they're moving around the world and they need their native language books as well. So there's lots of places. So do your research, find where it will sit, find some publishing houses that have probably translated before, and just approach.
Mm. Yeah, good advice there. Is it all children's books that have difficulty getting translated, or is it just specific?
No, I would say it's all books that they, you know, it's gets slightly trickier, as we all know, with picture books, but that's with everything that comes with picture books because of how this story is told through illustration and text. So it's not just about the text, but if it's the text that's been manipulated, what happens to the illustrations? Because if something has to be removed from that text because culturally it's not acceptable, or it would be something very different, but it's in the illustration, are they then going to have to change the illustration? So it is a minefield. It's not easy, but it's completely doable. So if you own the rights to your books, I would definitely, yeah, just start testing the waters.
Mm-hmm. And is it more difficult, do you think, with the rhyme in books as opposed to narrative?
Yeah, I mean, publishers will tell you that it is more difficult, and I get that it is, but it's not a no, because I've had, you know, in my book, and yes, the whole book isn't in rhyme, but there is rhyme in that book, and that has been translated into, you know, lots of languages, but it does take time. I mean, the Arabic one, I think we're probably on coming up to almost 2 years, but they're doing an amazing job. And it's not just the translator. We have the translator for the publishing house, plus the editor, and then plus the other editor. So there's a lot of collaboration that goes on with that one. The Chinese one, again, I mean, that's a whole nother market area, which is, you know, government run. So that's very, very tricky. And I've been working with that translator for 3.5 years. So, you know, and we're still not there yet with how it needs to be. So yeah,
it's an incredible amount of time, isn't it? Yeah. But understanding those processes is essential.
Yeah.
Chris, do you think you will get yours translated into other languages, or just keep it at the
it comes back to really what Sarah said. It depends. For instance, although the Stray Dogs are based in Turkey, the price I can get for selling a book here just means economically it's not viable. So, and also the way the Turkish language works, which, having been here all these years, I'm still struggling with. Arabic, for me, for the children's books, wouldn't work because the Arab world doesn't buy into dogs. They're not as much pet people as the Western world. So it very much comes down to where else would I consider doing it, where the book would sell, and at a price where everyone can afford to at least buy a cup of coffee. And for me, it's that research that matters. So the Spanish side, I fully understood. There's certainly potential, I think, for Portuguese because it's so widely spoken. I'm not sure a stray dog book would work in Chinese for me. But I also look at my older book of short stories for adults and go, that wouldn't work in Spanish. There's too many different things going on, but it might work in another language. And I hadn't given that too much thought because obviously I'm focusing on the first one and seeing all the mistakes I make and trying to learn from them. And I do think it just comes down to that research of why are you having it translated? Is there a market for it? And is the culture that you're translating that language into, is that book going to work? Because you might be writing about something that you go, works perfectly for our culture, but really wouldn't work in the Middle East, for example. So it depends on the book as to what languages I'd even consider, really. Because of my life history and having lived so much in the Middle East, of course I'd love my books in Arabic, but the cost of translating it would be more of a vanity project than reality for me.
Yeah, there's so many factors involved, isn't there? Michelle, which one of your books would you like to see translated?
Well, I've had Yellow Dress Day have sold the international rights, and when you're a traditionally published author, I think translation and international rights are two separate things. I haven't had one of my books translated into another language except Braille, which I'm very proud to say all of my books have been translated into Braille and are accessible for visually impaired kids. US market is very different with Yellow Dress Day, so having to change things like laundry basket to laundry hamper and mummy to mommy. So that was quite funny. The boys thought that was pretty hilarious that they had to change little things like that. But I exactly what Sarah was saying, like it would make my heart sing to know that I have had a book translated into another language. I think somebody who does it very well is Library for All here in Australia. They create accessible books for children all over the world, and they're translated into the language of the country where those books are being sent. So they have lots of Indigenous and local languages, and they work a lot with people in the communities where they're sending the books, and those books are available in print and also as ebooks. So if you are interested in Australia maybe doing something that you know will be translated, then contact Library for All, and they do take submissions for their books.
Yeah, fabulous, fabulous organisation. Holly, do you ever think you will get your book translated?
You know, honestly, I hadn't thought much about that, but I'm considering it. You know, just hearing about that, I mean, I think a memoir would be self-help kind of book. We'll have to do some research and see where those would fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess coming back to what both Chris and Sarah said about it may work for one country but not another, and that's where you really have to do your research and find
can I just
out.
ask what happens in Canada with English French, because obviously you're a dual language country. I know you've got your separate territory, but is that kind of a given for Canada that with publishing houses that you would have it in English and French, or would they stick to the one language dependent on territory?
You know, I've only done mine in English.
Yeah.
I haven't explored doing it in French at all. So like most products, you do have it in both. You like labeling, anything like that. But I haven't ever explored having it translated into French.
Yeah, because interestingly, my Belgian publisher, because obviously Belgium's Flanders, so that's Dutch, and then Wallonia, and you've got the French below. But he only takes the rights for the Dutch language. So although they are a dual language country, French is not acquired by them. So I was just wondering if that's the same for Canada, having French and English.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's something I hadn't thought of. So it's interesting.
We've had here in the UK some very small publishing houses do really well. There's one up in Scotland for sort of the Celtic languages are really coming through now. Welsh, I mean, we've got the Book Trust Wales now. I mean, they are huge, and they are actively driving to translate English books specifically for children through Book Trust. And I actually know the lady who does that, and she's amazing. She's just like this one woman band that is just translating the books into Welsh, but there is one for Scotland as well. So we're seeing the Celtic languages coming through quite a bit in the UK, and I think and I'm hearing more about those publishing houses. Actually, I think about 5 years ago I didn't know they existed, and yeah, I'm seeing them now at book fairs and on social media. So I think that's indicative of how they're bringing sort of these smaller marginalized languages into children's literature, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's all fascinating, isn't it? And I love the way I learn something new every time we get together and speak. And different thoughts come into my mind about about the two different languages, like the French and English, and like you were just saying about, you know, the Celtic and the Welsh, and it's just all fascinating. It's
Yeah.
there's just so many different worlds out there, isn't there, in the book world. So thank you everyone for your input today, wherever we are. Any final last words?
I would say go for it.
Funny enough,
Go for it.
sorry, Sarah.
It's okay. I was just going to say, yes, there is definitely, you know, kind of this rumbling in the publishing world of, you know, it is tricky, and it is, but it is completely possible. And I think it's really fun to experience it. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Chris, you
Yeah,
were going to say?
It's just scared me a little bit, because when you look at mainland Spain, the Spanish language is split even more than French and English in Canada, because you have the Catalan, you have the Basque, and it's almost like a different language every time. So yeah, I'll leave this in panic mode, I think.
No need to panic. It will all work out beautifully. So thank you everyone for your input again today, wherever you are in the world. Another great discussion, and I'll catch up with you all again next week.